I have just 45 days until the last full solar eclipse over North America for the next 20 years happens. If I want to film this, I'm going to need to learn how to film solar photography very quickly. Hi, I'm Maine and this is Time-Lapse Laboratory, and here's how I learned to take pictures of the sun in just 45 days. You'd think that taking a picture of the sun is pretty simple. Just point a camera and click away, pretty much like the rest of the videos on this channel. But in reality, it takes a whole collection of specialized equipment in order to get the shot you want. For instance, a solar filter or solar film that stops 99% of light from passing through into the camera. These just slide under the front of a camera lens or a telescope. The reason why I want to stop almost all of the light from coming into the camera is that if I don't, I'm going to burn out my image sensor when the lens focuses all the energy of the sun in the sensor for a few hours. When the sun hits the glass of a camera lens, it works almost exactly like a magnifying glass, focusing the sun rays onto a single point. It might be fine for a split second, but you can see this magnifying glass burns a hole through this paper very quickly. I don't want that to happen to my image sensor, especially because I intend to point my camera directly at the sun for over 3 hours while filming a time lapse of the eclipse. So that's why you want to use a solar filter or solar film whenever filming the sun. It's also why it's so important to protect your eyes from the sun when viewing an eclipse with special solar glasses. You can see here how the solar filter fully shadows the light coming through, hopefully protecting the image sensor on my camera, although the mirrored finish is supposed to point towards the sun. And this flat black side will point towards the camera. Because I didn't do any astrophotography prior to this project, the only lens that I have in my arsenal is this sports photography and bird watching lens, this 70 to 200 millimeter. It's a very good lens, but after doing some test shots, I found that the sun was still very, very small in the sensor, so I wanted something bigger. If it's gonna be 20 years before I can shoot this event again, I wanna do it right. You can see here in the test footage I took just how small the sun is in the sensor. While the footage is clear and fairly sharp, I just wasn't really happy with how much blank sensor I was leaving on the table. Also, in shooting this test footage, I realized just how fast the sun moves across the sky, and although I can stabilize this in post, it does cause the sun to jump around as I reposition the camera. And that's where this piece of equipment comes in. I purchased a Skywatcher Star Adventurer GTI specifically for this project to track the sun. I think this is a really neat piece of equipment. It has 2 axes of rotation and an altitude adjustment, allowing me to track any object above the horizon. The problem that I was encountering in the test footage is that the sun moves across the sky, or more technically, the Earth moves around the sun, causing the sun to appear like it's moving, which it is for the purposes of what I'm filming. Because the sun is at different points in the sky across the day, if I just set up my camera and point it at the sun, in 30 minutes the sun's going to be out of the frame. And I'll end up with eclipse footage like this. In order to try to improve the size of the sun that I was seeing in my sensor, I tried a bunch of different things, including buying a used Sigma 75 to 300 millimeter lens, trying some teleconverters which double the image size, putting 2 of them together, and also even trying some macro rings that I have from some macro photography that I've done on this channel before. These all worked a little better. I got okay results with this. But as you can see here in the test footage, I was having an even harder time learning how to use the tracker because the sun was so much larger, it moved out of the frame so much more quickly than it had before. But I was a lot happier with the size of the sun in these shots. Here's a size comparison of just how much larger the sun was appearing on the sensor when I added the teleconverters to the setup. Here's a side-by-side comparison as well. I thought it was a pretty fantastic improvement. Now we're all set up and I'm ready to film the sun. The only problem is I don't live in the path of totality. Totality being the area where a full 100% eclipse will occur and where the moon passes directly in front of my line of sight and the sun, fully obscuring it. So now that I had the equipment in hand and was using every clear day and even some cloudy days like this one to plan, the reality was setting in of where was I actually going to go to film the eclipse. What spot within the path of totality was going to give me a clear, cloudless, clean day. I was even setting up the tracker on cloudy days just to make sure that I could do it. I found it really cool to see the clouds in front of the sun in some of the test shots. After processing and stabilizing more test shots, I still wasn't quite happy with the size of the sun in the sensor. So that's where this comes in. This is a doublet telescope. It's really more of an astrograph because it's meant specifically for astrophotography, and I've modified it for solar photography with that big filter on the front. This is what's going to give me the size of the shot that I am looking for on the sensor. You can see the size comparison and just how much more glass you're getting in this. It is significantly heavier than the entire camera rig and actually comes close to maxing out my tracker. I also have this solar filter that I've mounted on the top. Because I am so crunched for time, I literally actually don't have enough time to get the bracket in before we have to go out onto location to shoot. But this Velcro will do just fine. It centers really nicely on top of the scope, and it'll make it easier to find the sun in the field. This thing extends huge to allow you to focus. This really hammers home the size difference. That camera actually gets mounted to the back of this telescope. I also added this 3x Barlow lens, which gives me 3 times magnification in the image sensor that will really help me bring the sun into the full size of the sensor. Hopefully adding this will only add a limited amount of softening and image degradation. And with all of these pieces of equipment, this is now the size of the sun in the camera. Once cropped in to fill the whole frame, this is what I'm looking at. And I'm very happy with how large this is and the quality of the image. The only issue with getting this equipment so close to the time of the eclipse was that I didn't really have much time to do many more tracking tests, especially once the weather took a turn for the worst. I wasn't able to see the sun or the moon to even test out the tracker with all this additional new weight on it. Theoretically, the tracker can handle the weight, but it will make it much more difficult to balance and line up. Just 4 days before the eclipse and it's sleeting. Certainly not ideal conditions to do any testing or look at the sun. Not living in the path of totality did give me some hope though that where we were going, there would be clear skies. But that certainly wasn't where I was now. With just over a day until the actual eclipse and just under a day before we had to leave for the eclipse, we finally got a break in the weather to do one more test on the equipment. The last check for all the eclipse, that is what we're working with. So hopefully when we go to Ohio or Canada or Vermont, it is better, but all the equipment's working. Hopefully this is not what we're looking at come Monday. So that begs the big question, where are we actually going to go to film the eclipse? With less than 12 hours left, we had to actually decide where we were going to go. After looking at essentially every cloud map and weather report along the path of totality within about a 24-hour drive of us, we determined that we were going to go to Lima, Ohio, because it was the easiest for us to drive to in the path of totality with the best chance of getting a great shot. Now it was time to take Time-Lapse Laboratory and all those equipment on the road. And lucky for us, it was only a little more than 8 hours drive away. But we were absolutely prepared and ready for the drive to film full totality. So my brother, my wife, and I got in the car and prepared for one of the coolest day trips I've ever taken, driving through the night so we would have plenty of time to set up tomorrow morning. Should not be awake. We planned to get there hours early for setup, and if we needed to change locations, left ourselves plenty of time to do that. Although after 8.5 hours of driving through the night, we were really hoping that wouldn't be the case.
So I think that's the bigger clouds in the distance is what defines the boundary in Ontario of eclipse versus not good for eclipse.
Nice.
Conditions are slightly better. In fact, the backup site conditions are better, but it's again, you get the less totality.
At the reservoir, we were going to get about 3 minutes of totality, and any other spot north, we were only going to get about 1 minute of totality. 2 hours before the eclipse, we made our final decision to stay at the Lima Bresler Lake Reservoir and film the eclipse. Although we were a little concerned with the wind with such a heavy payload on the tracking mount. We decided to get a little coffee and breakfast and then get set up. I brought 4 cameras and solar filters out to Ohio just in case there was some sort of technical issue. This is definitely one of those shoots where there is no do-over if anything goes wrong. So I tried to get everything up and shooting to determine if there was any issues that I would need to fix. With less than an hour to go before the eclipse started, I felt like I was in pretty good shape to capture the time lapses that I wanted. I was actually having a ton of issues with the camera that I'm sighting in right here, but that's why we have backups. The big scope was what I really wanted to make sure was perfect. It was going to give me the best view of the sunspots and totality, and it's what I had my best camera hooked to. I was really happy we were able to set up on this concrete cooking pad because when we were scouting locations, this is the exact location we actually wanted to set up in. It was clear, flat, and free of trees. The camera set up, mount set up, battery pack set up, all 3 cameras with the mounts, all waiting for the sun. Hopefully it goes off without a hitch. Even though we have these thin clouds, I was still able to focus on the sunspots through them. I was really hoping that these clouds would stay exactly as they were or even dissipate a little bit before the actual eclipse started. Because at this point, there was no way that we could move to another location before the eclipse. We just had to sit and hope for the best. We call this the sounds of totality. Just 3 cameras clicking every 5 seconds for 3.5 hours. Yeah, it's neat that you can see it in the telescope before you can see it with your eyes.
Oh yeah, you can see it with your eyes now.
Oh, that's cool. One thing I found really interesting is that whenever I turned the phone up to the sun momentarily, you can see that the lens flare is crescent shaped. I didn't want to point my phone at the sun for too long to show this off, but I thought it was pretty neat whenever I was just doing quick little glances up at the sun. But I didn't do it a lot because I didn't want to break my phone camera. I was really pleased that even through all that cloud cover, we were still getting crystal clear images like this. It was really hard to capture, but as the sun was eclipsed more and more by the moon, it kept getting darker and darker. But the phone camera I was using here was auto-adjusting the exposure, so you really can't see in the footage how much darker it actually was. Here's a quick view through the glasses. This is what I was seeing with my eyes. And then back in the telescope as we get really close to the start of totality. When totality happens, I have to very quickly take all the solar filters off the front of the scopes so that I can actually capture totality, because it's so much darker when the eclipse occurs. Because if I don't, the cameras will just record black frames. You can't really capture how much darker it is. I keep kind of pointing at this this shadow to sort of illustrate the point, but the camera doesn't really adjust for it well.
Well, let's see. Like, if I turn on my flash, like, can we see it on the ground? No, I can't. It's not dim it up yet.
But it is cool, you can see the little, I keep pointing the camera at the sun like I'm not supposed to, and you can see the little crescent in the corner. Filming this, you're kind of caught up between trying to enjoy totality and a full solar eclipse, while also making sure that I'm going to get the shots I need because of the month and a half of preparation I've done leading up to this. Things like taking the solar filters off, changing the exposure on the camera, and then, when totality is finished, quickly getting the solar filters back on, so I don't have that magnifying lens effects I showed earlier.
There it goes. It's almost there. I'm sure you're starting to get speeds.
It is so good.
Give it another like 30 seconds and we'll go.
Yeah,
And that's a total solar eclipse.
Whoa!
Venus?
Venus. It was really a surreal moment to have it be about 3:30 p.m. and have all the streetlights on, and it gets so dark that it looks like nighttime. You get this really interesting 360-degree sunset that is unlike anything I've ever seen before. It's really these unique effects that make being in the path of totality so special and unique. You don't get any of these effects being outside of the path. It was a very hard to describe feeling capturing this moment.
It's the spacecraft that has gone the closest to the sun. It's active right now, launched in 2016.
So after weeks of preparation, learning how to film solar photography, travel, here it is. The 2024 solar eclipse over the United States. The eclipse is broken up into a number of different stages. The first stage, known as first contact that you're seeing now, is just as the moon's leading edge starts to cover the sun. For this stage at our location, this lasted just over an hour. As the moon continues its transit in front of the sun, we approach second contact, which occurs at the 75-minute mark. This is when the entirety of the sun is covered by the moon and begins the phase known as totality, which for us was 3 minutes and 52 seconds long. Here, the direct sunlight is completely blocked and only the solar corona, or the outer atmosphere of the sun, is visible. I decided to play this footage back without changing the speed of what I shot it at. Here, each second of footage is 2.5 minutes of shooting time. I'm going to take some still frames and actually break down what we were able to see during totality, because it's such a unique event and a lot of the hidden features of the sun become visible to the unaided eye, or in the case of this footage, through a telescope. And you really can't see much in the 1.5 seconds, so I'm going to slow it down after fourth contact, which is pretty much exactly first contact, just on the trailing edge of the moon. I was really happy that the focus stayed perfect the entire duration of the event. The sunspots that I used to focus at the beginning of the event were still in perfect focus at the end here. The sunspot in the center is more than 5 times larger than Earth, for some perspective. And that was the 2024 solar eclipse. This is really the shot that I spent a month and a half preparing for. Full totality, allowing us to see the solar corona, Bailey's beads, which is that string of bright light on the outer edge of the sun, the solar prominences, which is the red fiery plasma on the outer edge. Here's that footage of totality again with no color correction, so that you can better see the sun's corona that becomes visible during totality. Those white wispy lines you can see around the sun's outer atmosphere are the corona. This phenomenon provides scientists with a rare opportunity to study the sun's corona and its magnetic field dynamics as it extends outward into space. The red plasma you can see in this shot are called solar prominences. They're large, glowing features extending outward from the sun's surface. These structures are composed of relatively cool and dense plasma suspended in the sun's hot outer atmosphere or corona. This dot is the approximate size of the Earth for some perspective on the size of these. Prominences can appear as arches or loops or curtains of glowing gas. They're often anchored to the sun's surface by magnetic fields and can persist for days or even weeks. Solar prominences are relatively stable compared to solar flares. Although some people will call these solar flares are actually a different solar phenomenon that we weren't able to see during this eclipse. Solar prominence and solar flares are both dynamic phenomena that occur on the sun's surface, but they differ in their appearance, cause, and effects. Here's the eclipse footage from that Canon 200mm lens. Because this is using a glass solar filter and not the solar film that was over the telescope, the colors are pretty significantly different, as different wavelengths of light are able to pass through different kinds of filters. When you see the image brighten up and get a bit hazy around the edge, that's actually a cloud coming in across the sun into the field of view during filming. During totality, this gave me some very unique shots. Because there was no tracker on this camera, I had to manually stabilize each of the 2,000 images in this sequence by hand, one by one, and I'm extremely happy with the final result here. If you want to see more behind the scenes of how these videos are created, you can support Time-Lapse Laboratory on Patreon. There I post behind the scenes updates of other projects that I'm working on, especially ones that take multiple years to film and produce. If you enjoyed this video, by far the best and easiest way you can support the channel is by subscribing. I really appreciate it, and if you want to see more time-lapse content like this, that is what's on this channel. And these are the kind of projects that I love making. This video isn't sponsored. My goal with these videos is to showcase cool and interesting time-lapse projects to those that are interested. The last time I was on this much of a time crunch filming was the Brood X 17-year cicada emergence that happened to be the week of my wedding. You can see that project here. It's nice to have a few years between time-sensitive projects like this. This is the first frame after I removed the solar filter on this camera, before totality. You can see a plane silhouetted in the left-hand side of the frame, and I thought it was just wild that I was able to capture that. The next few frames show just how cloudy it was right before totality. I've been filming time-lapse for over 15 years, and at this point, I really enjoy producing this kind of content. The channel is almost at 1,000 subscribers, and it would mean a ton to me to be able to get over that threshold after all these years. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a science enthusiast in your life, and leave me a comment on what your favorite moment of the video was. As always, thank you.